In the early 1990s, the Colombian government found itself in a deadly struggle with Pablo Escobar, the world's most notorious drug lord. Escobar's Medellín cartel had unleashed waves of terror across Colombia, from car bombings to assassinations of politicians, judges, and journalists. The government was desperate to end the bloodshed, but Escobar was a man who never played by the rules, and even prison would become part of his empire. In 1991, Escobar struck a deal with the Colombian government. He agreed to surrender and face imprisonment on one condition. He would design and control his own prison. This was no ordinary jail. It became known as La Catedral, the Cathedral, located high in hills overlooking Medellín. It was less a prison and more a fortress of luxury. Behind its walls, Escobar lived like a king. The compound had a soccer field, a bar, a nightclub, a jacuzzi, a gym, and even a waterfall. His loyal hitmen served as guards, and his friends, family, and associates came and went freely. From within La Catedral, Escobar continued running the Medellín cartel, ordering assassinations, negotiating deals, and maintaining his empire. The prison was a cruel joke on justice. For the Colombian government, it was a desperate compromise. For Escobar, it was a perfect shield. He could avoid extradition to the United States while living in comfort. But eventually, the illusion shattered. Reports emerged of Escobar torturing and killing rivals inside La Catedral. The prison's walls were not keeping him in. They were keeping his enemies out. By 1992, the government could no longer ignore the scandal. Plans were made to transfer Escobar to a real prison. But Escobar, always one step ahead, escaped La Catedral before authorities could move him. His escape triggered one of the largest manhunts in history, ultimately leading to his death in December 1993. La Catedral today is a tourist attraction, a haunting reminder of a time when one man was so powerful that he built a prison designed not to punish him, but to protect him. It stands as a symbol of corruption, power, and the blurred lines between justice and crime in Colombia's darkest years. Pablo Escobar's surrender in 1991 was not the kind of surrender the world expected from the most feared drug lord of his time. By then, Colombia was drowning in chaos. Judges, politicians, and even presidential candidates had been assassinated by Escobar's Medellín cartel. Entire cities lived under the shadow of car bombs and machine gun fire. The Colombian government was under immense pressure from both its citizens and the United States, which demanded Escobar's extradition to face trial on American soil. But Escobar was a master negotiator, a man who understood power not through force alone, but through psychological warfare. He knew the government was desperate for peace, and he used that desperation as leverage. Instead of being captured, he proposed his own version of justice. He offered to turn himself in, but only under conditions that suited him. He demanded guarantees against extradition, freedom from harassment, and most astonishingly, the right to build his own prison. This was not a gesture of weakness. Escobar wasn't bowing to the government. He was outsmarting it to the public. His surrender looked like the beginning of justice. To Escobar, it was simply the next stage in his strategy for survival. By surrendering on his own terms, he transformed the very idea of prison from a punishment into a sanctuary. When Escobar's surrender was finalized, the world expected to see him locked away in a concrete cell behind steel bars. Instead, he built and controlled his own prison, La Catedral. Unlike any prison before it, La Catedral was not designed by the state. It was designed by the prisoner himself. Escobar personally oversaw its construction on a mountaintop overlooking Medellín, carefully choosing the site for its security and seclusion. The facility wasn't just a place of confinement. It was a fortress, tailored to protect him from both rivals and the government. Every detail of La Catedral reflected Escobar's power. He decided the layout, the architecture, and even who would be allowed inside. The prison was heavily guarded, but not by Colombian police or soldiers. The guards were his own loyal men, hand-picked sicarios who owed their lives and fortunes to Escobar. They didn't watch him to keep him in. They watched to make sure no one could get to him. The irony was striking. The most dangerous criminal in the world was in a prison that he commanded like a king in his castle. To the Colombian government, this arrangement seemed like a compromise worth making, at least temporarily. They could claim Escobar was behind bars, while Escobar himself turned the concept of imprisonment into a shield against extradition and an extension of his empire. La Catedral wasn't simply a prison. It was Escobar's stronghold, a symbol of just how much influence he still wielded. Even when he was supposedly under control, the LA Catedral was not hidden away in some remote jungle or buried deep underground. Instead, Escobar chose to build it high in the green hills of Envigado, overlooking Medellín, the very city he controlled and loved. The location was no accident. It gave him a commanding view of the valley below, allowing him to literally look down upon the city that had made him rich and feared. From this mountaintop fortress, Escobar could see the neighborhoods where his cartel operated, the streets where his sicarios enforced his will, and even the homes of politicians and officials who once tried to bring him down. The site was also chosen for its natural defenses. The thick forest, steep terrain, and winding roads made it almost impossible for government forces to launch a surprise attack. Anyone approaching La Catedral could be spotted long before they arrived. In a sense, the landscape itself acted as part of Escobar's security system, shielding him from danger while giving him the peace of mind to continue running his empire without fear of sudden betrayal. For Escobar, this location was perfect. It wasn't just about safety. It was about symbolism. By overlooking Medellín, he reminded both his enemies and his supporters that even though he was in prison, he remained above the city, untouchable and powerful. La Catedral wasn't simply built in the mountains. It was built to reinforce Escobar's image as the king of Medellín, a ruler who dictated terms to the government while never truly losing control of his empire. Inside La Catedral, the word prison lost its meaning. What Escobar created was closer to a private resort than a place of punishment. Behind its walls were luxuries that no other inmate in the world could ever imagine. There was a full-size soccer field where Escobar and his men played matches that often turned into parties, complete with spectators and music. A nightclub and a bar allowed endless celebrations, as if the kingpin had never left Medellín's nightlife. The prison also featured a jacuzzi and spa-like areas where Escobar relaxed with friends, mistresses, and family members. He had a fully equipped gym, complete with weights and machines, so he could stay in top condition. To top it off, there was even a man-made waterfall and gardens, giving the prison an air of tranquility and escape from the chaos outside. These luxuries made La Catedral not just a place of comfort, but also a demonstration of power, a message to the world that even when imprisoned, Escobar could live in excess. Every corner of the prison reflected his wealth and influence. Rooms were furnished like hotel suites, stocked with fine liquor and gourmet meals prepared by chefs. For Escobar, La Catedral became more than a safe haven. It became proof of his ability to bend the system to his will. Where the government saw a prison, Escobar had built a palace. LA Catedral may have been called a prison, but its guards were not servants of the Colombian state. They were servants of Pablo Escobar himself. Every man stationed at the gates, every guard patrolling the walls, was handpicked from Escobar's inner circle. These were not neutral officers upholding the law. They were sicarios, men who owed their loyalty, wealth, and even their survival to Escobar. Their purpose was not to keep him locked in, but to keep his enemies out. This made La Catedral less of a correctional facility and more of a fortress. Visitors to the prison were carefully screened, not by government authorities, but by Escobar's trusted men. Even Colombian officials who attempted to visit had to go through Escobar's own approval. The guards ensured that no one could get close enough to betray him, kidnap him, or attempt an assassination. In reality, the government had given Escobar a fortified castle disguised as a prison. The loyalty of his guards was absolute. They were willing to kill without hesitation to protect their boss. For Escobar, this arrangement was ideal. He had complete freedom inside La Catedral while maintaining layers of protection from rivals, informants, and even the state itself. To the outside world, Escobar was supposedly under control. But in truth, he had never been more secure. The very walls meant to hold him captive had been turned into barriers, shielding him from danger. Unlike a real prison, where inmates are cut off from the outside world, La Catedral was wide open to those Pablo Escobar chose to welcome. Friends, family, mistresses, business partners, even soccer teams were free to come and go as if they were visiting a country estate, not a high-security prison. On weekends, the compound often looked more like a social club than a penitentiary. Laughter, music, and the smell of fine food filled the air while Escobar entertained guests. His wife, children, and mother visited frequently, enjoying long stays without restrictions. Associates from the Medellín cartel held meetings inside the prison walls, where deals were struck and disputes settled. Political allies and corrupt officials also made appearances, ensuring Escobar's influence extended far beyond the mountainside. Some visitors even joined him for parties that stretched late into the night, complete with alcohol, women, and live entertainment. This freedom of movement reinforced Escobar's image as untouchable. Where other criminals were punished by isolation, Escobar uses prison as a stage to maintain his power, loyalty, and reputation. Each guest who walked freely into La Catedral became part of a carefully crafted illusion that Escobar had surrendered, when in truth he was still the same kingpin, surrounded by his people, commanding respect and fear alike. Even while confined within La Catedral, Pablo Escobar never stopped being the boss of the Medellín cartel. In fact, the prison became his new command center. From a lavishly furnished office inside the compound, he held meetings, gave orders, and directed operations just as he had on the outside. His cartel's drug routes, shipments, and financial flows continued without interruption, proving that his surrender had done nothing to weaken his empire. Escobar used phones, visitors, and trusted messengers to maintain constant communication with his lieutenants. Orders for assassinations, kidnappings, and payoffs flowed out of La Catedral as smoothly as cocaine shipments moved across borders. In this way, the prison was not a limitation, but an advantage. It kept Escobar safe from rivals and extradition, while giving him the freedom to manage his empire with total security. To the world, it was shocking. How could a man locked in prison remain so powerful? But Escobar thrived on control. He ruled over his cartel with the same iron grip, making it clear to both allies and enemies that his reign did not end at La Catedral's walls. In truth, the prison only strengthened his legend. Escobar had proven that not even the Colombian government could cage him. Instead, he turned a place meant for punishment into the headquarters of one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. From within La Catedral, Escobar's power was not only maintained, it was weaponized. He ordered assassinations with the same ease as if he were sitting in his Medellín mansion. Enemies who dared to challenge him were lured into the prison walls under the guise of negotiations, only to be tortured or executed on Escobar's command. La Catedral became infamous not as a place of justice, but as a site of bloodshed, where Escobar's rivals vanished and his rule was enforced with fear. Drug deals were also negotiated from his so-called cell. Escobar managed shipments, arranged payments, and authorized new smuggling routes, ensuring the Medellín cartel's cocaine empire continued to thrive. Visitors carried his instructions back into the outside world, spreading his influence like veins across Colombia and beyond. Each order that left La Catedral proved that the prison had done nothing to sever Escobar's reach. For Escobar, La Catedral was more than a sanctuary. It was a command post. He lived in comfort while unleashing violence across Colombia, reminding both allies and enemies that he remained untouchable. Far from silencing him, the prison had given him a mask of legitimacy. While behind the walls, he orchestrated death, wealth, and terror with chilling precision. La Catedral stood as a bizarre contradiction, part luxury resort, part maximum security fortress. On one side, it offered Escobar and his inner circle pleasures that few Colombians could ever dream of: fine dining, lavish parties, endless alcohol, and the comfort of private suites. It was a place where Escobar could host soccer matches during the day and nightclubs after dark. To his family, it was a safe haven. To his allies, it was a place of business and celebration. Yet beneath the surface of luxury, La Catedral was also a fortress. Its walls were tall and heavily guarded, not to keep Escobar in, but to keep danger out. Armed sicarios patrolled the perimeter. Lookout posts watched the roads below, and the mountaintop terrain gave the compound a natural defensive advantage. Anyone approaching had to travel a winding, narrow road where escape was nearly impossible. The location itself was like a shield, making it almost impregnable. This strange blend of comfort and security made La Catedral unlike any prison in history. It was at once a palace, a party hall, and a fortress, designed with only one purpose: to serve Escobar. Where most men behind bars lost power, Escobar gained it. La Catedral blurred the line between captivity and freedom, turning punishment into privilege and transforming Colombia's justice system into a global embarrassment. For the Colombian government, allowing La Catedral to exist was nothing short of desperation. By 1991, the country was being torn apart by Escobar's violence. Judges, politicians, police officers, even innocent civilians were being murdered in a relentless wave of terror. Car bombs ripped through the streets of Medellín and Bogotá, leaving hundreds dead and thousands living in fear. The United States was demanding Escobar's extradition, threatening to expose Colombia as a failed state if it could not control its most dangerous criminal. Faced with this chaos, the government struck a deal. They agreed to let Escobar surrender on his own terms, believing that his imprisonment, even in a luxury prison, would at least stop the bloodshed. To the world, they could say, Pablo Escobar is behind bars. To their people, they could promise, the violence will end. It was a gamble, a compromise between justice and survival. But this decision carried a heavy price. By letting Escobar design and control La Catedral, the government effectively handed him protection under the law. They could no longer pursue him without violating their own agreement. What they saw as a victory was, in reality, a humiliating concession. Escobar had not surrendered to justice. Justice had surrendered to him to AT first. La Catedral was sold to Colombian people as a solution, an end to the violence, a promise that Escobar was finally under control. But soon, disturbing reports began to emerge, shattering the illusion. Inside the prison walls, Escobar was not a prisoner. He was a judge, jury, and executioner. Rivals who dared to challenge his authority were lured into the compound under the pretense of negotiations. Once inside, many never came out alive. Witnesses later revealed that La Catedral became a site of brutal torture and cold-blooded murders. Escobar ordered executions with chilling ease, often carried out by his most loyal sicarios right within the prison. Corpses were disposed of in secret, and the government, though aware of these rumors, hesitated to act. After all, to interfere would mean admitting to the world that they had given Escobar a safe haven for violence. The prison that was meant to restore peace had instead become a slaughterhouse hidden in the mountains. It became clear that La Catedral was not reducing bloodshed. It was simply concentrating Escobar's terror behind fortified walls. Every killing inside those walls was a reminder that Escobar's power was untouched, that he remained the master of life and death even while imprisoned. For Pablo Escobar, La Catedral was more than a sanctuary of luxury. It was a shield against his greatest fear: extradition to the United States. To him, prison in Colombia was tolerable, even desirable, because he could bend the system to his will. But extradition meant facing an American courtroom, a federal prison, and the certainty that his empire would collapse without him at the helm. From the very beginning of negotiations with the Colombian government, Escobar made one demand above all else: no extradition. La Catedral became the legal loophole that protected him. By confining himself to a Colombian prison, one he designed, he could argue that he was fulfilling justice at home, and thus avoid being handed over to U.S. authorities. In truth, he had turned his own prison into a legal fortress, every bit as effective as the armed guards who patrolled its gates. This condition exposed the government's weakness. They could not risk defying Escobar, knowing the violence he could unleash. So instead, they gave him exactly what he wanted: the protection of Colombian soil and the comfort of a prison built to his liking. For Escobar, it was the perfect arrangement. He lived with the privileges of a king while shielding himself from the only punishment he truly feared. BY 1992, the illusion of control at La Catedral had completely unraveled. The Colombian government could no longer ignore the reports of murders, parties, and criminal operations being conducted behind the prison walls. What was supposed to be a symbol of justice had turned into a symbol of corruption, humiliation, and Escobar's unchecked power. Pressure from the public, and especially from the United States, grew impossible to silence. Something had to change. The government finally made the decision to transfer Escobar to a real prison, one he could not control, one designed to truly confine him. Plans were drawn quietly, as officials knew Escobar would never accept the move willingly. Soldiers were prepared, helicopters were on standby, and the operation was meant to be swift, stripping Escobar of his luxurious sanctuary once and for all. But this plan underestimated the man they were dealing with. Escobar had spies everywhere, even inside the government itself. He learned of the transfer before it could be carried out. To him, La Catedral was more than a prison. It was a stronghold, his safety, his empire. And the moment he realized the government was ready to take it away, he prepared to do what he always did best: escape. When word reached Escobar that the government intended to transfer him from La Catedral to a real prison, he acted before they could strike. On the night of July 22, 1992, Colombian authorities moved to take control of the compound. Soldiers surrounded the mountaintop fortress, preparing to storm it, but Escobar, always a step ahead, had already set his escape in motion. Hidden passages, loyal guards, and his intimate knowledge of the terrain gave him the advantage. While the army advanced toward La Catedral, Escobar and a handful of trusted men slipped through the shadows and vanished into the dense forest surrounding the prison. By the time soldiers broke inside, the king of Medellín was gone. Once again, he had embarrassed the government, proving to the world that even under so-called imprisonment, he was untouchable. His escape triggered chaos across Colombia. Panic rippled through the nation as citizens realized Escobar was free again. The government's credibility collapsed overnight. How could they lose the world's most dangerous criminal when he was supposedly already in their custody? International pressure mounted. The United States grew furious, and Colombia was thrown back into a nightmare that hope was ending. Escobar's flight from La Catedral marked not just an escape from prison, but the rebirth of his war against the state. That Escobar's escape from La Catedral set off one of the largest manhunts in modern history. The Colombian government, humiliated on the world stage, had no choice but to act with unprecedented force. They mobilized thousands of soldiers and police, backed by U.S. intelligence agencies, including the DEA and CIA. A special unit known as the Search Block was created with one mission only: capture or kill Pablo Escobar. For over a year, Escobar remained on the run. He moved constantly, hiding in safe houses across Medellín, relying on loyalists to shelter and protect him. Yet with each passing month, his power weakened. Rivals in the Cali cartel grew stronger, informants betrayed him for reward money, and his once loyal empire began to crumble under the pressure of constant pursuit. By December 1993, Escobar's world had collapsed to just a few safe houses and a handful of guards. On December 2nd, Colombian forces, guided by intelligence, tracked him to a modest rooftop hideout in Medellín. In the ensuing chase and gunfight, Escobar was shot and killed. For the government, it was the end of a bloody chapter. For Colombia, it was both a moment of relief and a reminder of the chaos one man had unleashed. La Catedral, once Escobar's luxury prison, now stood as a monument to the corruption, fear, and illusion of control that had allowed him to rise so high. His death closed the story, but the shadow of his reign continued to haunt Colombia for generations. La Catedral remains one of history's most surreal symbols of power, the only prison built not to punish a criminal, but to protect him. For Pablo Escobar, it was a fortress, a palace, and a command center. For Colombia, it was a national wound, a reminder of how deeply corruption had weakened the state. Escobar may have died on a Medellín rooftop in 1993, but La Catedral still stands today. Visitors walk its grounds as tourists, gazing at what was once the seat of a drug lord's empire. It is a chilling reminder of how one man bent the law to his will, and how a prison meant for justice became a monument to his defiance. The story of La Catedral is not just about Pablo Escobar. It is about the dangers of compromise, the fragility of justice, and the cost a nation pays when fear outweighs the rule of law.